I am Riley, 33 years old, and my parents always made it abundantly clear that my sister was the favorite. This Thanksgiving, they proved it again by gifting her a $13,000 luxury cruise and tossing me a $1 scratch off ticket. They told me I was a jobless burden, and it was the only way I would ever see a dime. But when that exact ticket revealed a $200 million jackpot, their narrative crumbled. That night, I watched my phone light up with 89 missed calls from them and simply smiled. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who finally got the ultimate payback. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, appearance was the only currency my parents traded in. My mother, Eleanor, and my father, Howard, measured success strictly by corporate titles and bank statements. As a freelance ghostwriter working from my modest apartment, I was basically invisible to them. I drove up the winding driveway of their sprawling Tudor-style estate with a 20-pound organic turkey resting carefully in the passenger seat of my 10-year-old sedan. I had spent 2 days brining and roasting that bird, hoping that just this once, my effort might earn a genuine smile from my mother. I carried the heavy roasting pan through the grand double doors, the rich aroma of rosemary and garlic filling the pristine foyer. My mother stood in the kitchen wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I brought the turkey, I announced, setting the heavy pan on the marble island. She peered over her reading glasses, her nose wrinkling slightly as if I had placed a dead rodent on her countertops. Riley, she sighed, adjusting her diamond watch. You really did not need to bother. Your father ordered a pre-cooked heritage bird from that artisan catering company in Manhattan. I just do not trust homemade poultry from a freelance budget. It always tastes so working class. I felt a familiar sting in my chest but swallowed it down. I am a professional writer, Mom, I reminded her softly. I make a good living. She waved her hand dismissively. Writing blog posts in your pajamas is not a career, Riley. It is a hobby that barely pays the bills. We just wish you had some actual ambition. Before I could defend my income, the heavy oak front door swung open, accompanied by the loud, obnoxious beep of a luxury car locking system. My sister Brianna and her husband Terrence stepped into the foyer, immediately sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Brianna, 29 and perpetually dressed like she was stepping onto a yacht, held out her arms. Terrence followed closely behind her. He was a highly successful African-American senior tax attorney at one of the top corporate law firms in the state. He was undeniably brilliant, but carried an arrogance that preceded him into every room. My mother practically shoved me aside to greet them. Brianna, darling, you look absolutely stunning, my mother gushed, kissing both her cheeks. And Terrence, is that a new car outside? It looks incredibly expensive. Terrence adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit and flashed a blindingly bright smile. Just a little upgrade for your favorite daughter, Eleanor. The firm had a record-breaking quarter, so I thought Brianna deserved something European to drive around town. He conveniently failed to mention that I had recently seen the exact same car listed on a luxury rental app, but I knew better than to bring reality into my mother's fantasy world. Terrence turned his sharp gaze toward me, looking me up and down with barely concealed pity. Riley, he said, his tone slick and practiced. Still typing away in your living room. You really should let me look over your taxes this year. I imagine managing a freelance income is terrifying without a steady corporate safety net. We could probably find a way to write off that sweater you are wearing. Brianna giggled, leaning into his shoulder. Oh, Terrence, leave her alone. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate grind. Somebody has to write those little articles people read while waiting in line at the grocery store. My father, Howard, strode into the kitchen, beaming at the sight of his favorite son-in-law. Terrence, my boy, he boomed, clapping him on the back. Come into the study. I have a bottle of scotch that costs more than Riley's car. Let us talk about the market. They vanished into the den, leaving me alone with my cold, rejected turkey. Dinner was exactly the agonizing performance I expected. We sat at the long dining table under the crystal chandelier, eating the catered Manhattan turkey, while mine sat untouched on the kitchen counter. For an hour, I listened in silence as my parents praised Terrence's latest court victory and Brianna's busy schedule of social club luncheons. When the plates were finally cleared, my mother stood up and tapped her crystal wine glass with a silver spoon. Howard and I have a special Thanksgiving surprise, she announced, her eyes fixed entirely on Brianna. Since our youngest daughter has been dealing with so much stress managing her household and supporting her husband's high-powered career, we thought she deserved a proper escape. My father pulled a thick, glossy envelope from his blazer and slid it across the table to Brianna. She tore it open and let out a theatrical scream. "Oh my God, Mom, Dad, you did not! A 10-day luxury cruise through the Mediterranean," my mother beamed, practically glowing with self-satisfaction. "First-class suites all the way, darling. $13,000 of pure relaxation. You and Terrence deserve the absolute best." Brianna rushed over to hug them, and Terrence raised his glass in a silent, smug toast to my parents. I sat quietly staring at my empty plate. I did not expect a lavish gift. I never did. But the blatant inequality always felt like a physical blow. My mother returned to her seat and suddenly seemed to remember I was at the table. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small crumpled piece of paper, tossing it carelessly across the polished wood. It landed right next to my water glass. A single $1 scratch-off lottery ticket. The bright, cheap colors of the ticket looked completely absurd against the fine china and crystal. I looked from the ticket to my mother, confusion mixing with a deep rising humiliation. "What is this?" I asked softly. My mother took a slow sip of her wine. "Well, Riley, since you insist on throwing your life away on freelance fantasies instead of getting a real job, we figured this is your only shot at a future." She laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "Think of it as an investment. You are practically wasting the food we put on this table anyway, so maybe you will get lucky and win $20 to buy your own groceries next week." The entire table erupted into laughter. Brianna covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with mirth, while my father chuckled approvingly at my mother's cruel joke. I sat entirely frozen, my hands resting on my lap so no one would see them trembling. The heat of total humiliation crawled up my neck and settled in my cheeks. Terrence leaned back in his chair, swirling his expensive scotch. He looked at the dollar scratch-off ticket and smiled a slow, calculating grin. "Do not look so miserable, Riley," he drawled, his voice carrying across the dining room. "At least the ticket is an efficient gift. If you win nothing, which is statistically guaranteed, you have zero tax liability. It is the perfect asset for someone in your tax bracket because its actual value is exactly what you bring to this family. Nothing." The laughter intensified. I looked around the table at the people who were supposed to be my family. I saw zero love, zero respect, and zero empathy. I slowly picked up the cheap piece of cardboard, the rough edges scraping against my skin. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply pushed my chair back and stood up. The scraping sound of the wood against the floor silenced their laughter for a brief moment. "Enjoy your catered turkey," I said, my voice steady, despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "I am going to go waste my time somewhere else." I walked out the front door into the freezing Connecticut night, clutching that $1 ticket. I had no idea that Terrence was absolutely wrong about my tax liability because in less than an hour, that worthless piece of cardboard was going to flip my entire universe upside down. I had barely reached the icy driveway when a sharp blast of wind bit through my thin coat, reminding me of a crucial detail. My car keys were still sitting on the marble kitchen island, trapped right next to my untouched home-roasted turkey. I cursed under my breath, my fingers clenching the cheap cardboard of the scratch-off ticket in my pocket. I turned around and trudged back up the grand front steps, slipping quietly through the heavy oak doors. I intended to grab my keys and vanish, but my mother intercepted me in the hallway. Her arms were crossed, her silk blouse pristine, her expression rigid. "Leaving so soon, Riley," she demanded, her voice a harsh whisper that echoed in the cavernous foyer. "If you cannot contribute financially to this family, you will at least contribute your labor. The caterers left early and the kitchen is a disaster. You are not stepping foot out of this house until every piece of fine china is scrubbed and put away. Consider it payment for the heating bill you are driving up by opening that door. I was too emotionally exhausted to fight back. The humiliation at the dinner table had drained whatever fight I had left. Without a word, I walked past her and tied an apron over my sweater. For the next hour, I stood at the massive farmhouse sink, my hands submerged in scalding soapy water. I scrubbed the grease off their elegant plates, washed the crystal wine glasses that had toasted to my sister's luxury cruise, and scraped the remnants of their overpriced catered turkey into the garbage disposal. The physical labor was mindless, but the hot water stung my skin, a sharp physical reminder of my place in this house. I was the help. I was the unwanted burden. The kitchen connected to a walk-in pantry that shared a thin wall with my father's study. As I dried the last silver platter, I heard the heavy study door open and close, followed by hushed, urgent voices leaking through the ventilation grate near the pantry shelves. It was my mother and Brianna. I froze the dish towel hanging limp in my hands and stepped closer to the grate to listen. "Mom, you have to help me," Brianna was saying, her previously bubbly voice now frantic and strained. "Terrence is going to kill me if he finds out. The credit cards are completely maxed out. The luxury car rental agency is threatening to press charges because the payment bounced, and I owe over $80,000 in high-interest personal loans. The cruise is great, but it does not pay my creditors." I held my breath. The luxury vehicle parked in the driveway was a rental. The perfect wealthy lifestyle my sister and her high-powered attorney husband flaunted was a complete fabrication built on a mountain of hidden debt. "Keep your voice down," Eleanor hissed. "Terrence cannot know about this. If a senior tax attorney finds out his own wife is committing financial fraud, it will ruin his reputation and his partnership track. Your father and I have a plan to bail you out, but it requires absolute discretion." "What plan?" Brianna sniffled. "You guys just spent thousands on this dinner and that cruise ticket. We are taking out a home equity loan on the downtown apartment," my mother said smoothly. "Property values have skyrocketed. We can pull out $150,000 in cash by next week. We will clear your debts, pay off the car rental, and no one will be the wiser. Terrence will never know his wife was drowning in collections." But Mom Brianna hesitated. "Riley lives in that apartment. She pays you rent." My mother scoffed, a sound so laced with contempt it made my stomach churn. "She pays us a fraction of market value. We own the deed. She is merely occupying space we generously provided. We are issuing her a 30-day eviction notice on Monday. Once she is out, we secure the loan, fix your mess, and sell the property entirely." "What is Riley going to do?" Brianna asked, not out of concern but mild curiosity. "She can find a cheap studio in an undesirable neighborhood," my mother replied coldly. "She is a single freelance ghostwriter. She does not need a prime downtown location. You are married to a top-tier lawyer, Brianna. You have appearances to maintain. We have a family legacy to protect. Riley has always been useless, so for once in her life, her eviction will actually serve a purpose." I backed away from the ventilation grate, my hands shaking violently. They were not just insulting my career or giving me gag gifts. They were actively plotting to render me homeless to cover up my sister's reckless financial fraud. I paid that rent on time every single month. I treated that apartment like my sanctuary, and they were going to yank it out from under me without a second thought, tossing me into the freezing winter rental market just to maintain the illusion of Brianna's perfect life. I quietly untied the apron and let it drop onto the pristine marble floor. I grabbed my car keys from the island, making sure to leave my cold, untouched turkey right where it was. I walked out the back door, this time, slipping into the freezing darkness of the Connecticut night. The icy wind hit my wet hands, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the absolute ice forming in my veins. I cranked the ignition of my 10-year-old sedan, the engine sputtering a harsh protest against the freezing Connecticut air before finally catching. I slammed the car into drive and sped down the winding manicured driveway, my tires slipping slightly on the fresh layer of snow that had begun to coat the pavement. The heater in my car was notoriously slow to warm up, leaving me shivering violently as I navigated the dark tree-lined streets of my parents' exclusive neighborhood. The physical cold was intense, but the chill radiating from my chest was paralyzing. I was 33 years old, working 50-hour weeks, typing my fingers to the bone, paying my rent on time, and doing everything within my power to be a responsible, independent adult. And yet, with a casual conversation over leftover catered turkey, my mother and sister had decided to erase my entire foundation. They were going to throw me onto the street in the dead of winter to protect a lie. Brianna was drowning in $80,000 of consumer debt and driving a fraudulently rented luxury car, but I was the one who had to pay the price. My apartment, my sanctuary, my home was just collateral damage in the ongoing campaign to preserve the myth of the flawless golden child. Tears of pure, unadulterated rage blurred my vision. I swiped angrily at my eyes with the back of my damp dishwater-chapped hand. For years, I had swallowed their insults. I had absorbed the jokes about my freelance career, endured the comparisons to Terrence's corporate salary, and accepted the scraps of affection my parents occasionally threw my way. I had convinced myself that if I just kept my head down, paid my rent, and stayed out of their way, I could at least maintain a peaceful coexistence. But peace was a delusion. To them, I was not a daughter. I was a financial safety net, a human shield they could toss in front of Brianna's catastrophic life choices. The snow began to fall heavier, thick white flakes swirling hypnotically in the glare of my dull headlights. The road visibility was dropping rapidly. My windshield wipers squeaked in a frantic rhythm, struggling to clear the accumulating slush. I knew I could not make the full 40-minute drive back to my downtown apartment in these conditions, especially not while my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Up ahead, the garish neon sign of a 24-hour gas station cut through the whiteout conditions. I signaled and pulled into the slushy, desolate lot, parking under the flickering fluorescent canopy. I cut the engine and sat in the quiet, freezing darkness of my car, listening to the wind howl against the windows. The emotional exhaustion hit me like a physical weight, pressing me down into the worn fabric of the driver's seat. I rested my forehead against the freezing steering wheel and finally let out the sob I had been choking back since dinner. I cried for the little girl who had always tried to paint perfect pictures to win her mother's attention. I cried for the teenager who had taken extra jobs to pay for her own college textbooks while her sister maxed out parent-funded credit cards. Most of all, I cried for the grown woman who had just realized she was completely and utterly alone in the world. After 10 minutes of raw, heavy tears, the dropping temperature inside the car forced me to move. I needed something hot to drink before my fingers went completely numb. I grabbed my wallet and pushed open the heavy glass door of the convenience store. The bell chimed harshly. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager in a faded polo shirt, barely glanced up from his phone. The stark, overly bright aisles of cheap snacks and motor oil were a jarring contrast to the crystal chandeliers and mahogany dining tables I had just escaped. I poured a cup of cheap, burnt-smelling coffee from a thermal carafe paid at the counter and walked back out into the biting cold. Instead of getting immediately back into my freezing car, I leaned against the driver's side door, letting the heat from the flimsy paper cup seep into my palms. As I shifted my weight, I felt a stiff edge digging through the fabric of my coat pocket. I reached inside and pulled out the crumpled piece of cardboard my mother had tossed at me like a bone to a stray dog. The $1 lottery ticket. I stared at the cheap, colorful printing under the harsh glare of the gas station canopy. "Think of it as an investment," my mother's cruel, mocking voice echoed in my head. "Maybe you will get lucky and win $20 to buy your own groceries next week." A bitter, cynical laugh escaped my lips, turning into a cloud of white vapor in the freezing air. "Why not?" I muttered to myself. "Let us see exactly how much my family values my future." I balanced my coffee on the roof of the car and dug a quarter out of my coat pocket. The cold metal bit into my fingertips. I pressed the coin against the silver scratch-off coating of the ticket. The physical act of scratching felt aggressively satisfying, the silver flakes peeling away under my harsh, angry movements. I scratched off the winning numbers section first, revealing a 12 and a 34. Then I moved down to the player's numbers row. I scratched the first circle. A 7. Nothing. I scratched the second. A 22. Nothing. I let out another dark laugh, my breath hitching in the cold. Of course, it was perfectly fitting. The ultimate symbol of my parents' regard for me was completely worthless. I moved the coin to the third circle, pressing down harder, scraping the silver away with a violent flick of my wrist. A 12 appeared. I paused the quarter, hovering over the card. I had matched a number. A strange, completely irrational flutter of anticipation rippled through my chest. I moved the coin down to the prize box located directly beneath the matching 12. I scratched away the coating, preparing to see a $1 or maybe a $5 prize. The silver dust cleared away, revealing a bold black print. $200 million. I stared at the cluster of zeros. My brain simply refused to process the visual information. I blinked rapidly, squeezing my eyes shut against the biting wind, convinced the cold was playing tricks on my exhausted mind. I rubbed my thumb over the text, half expecting the cheap ink to smear, half expecting to find a punchline printed underneath. A gag gift. That had to be it. My mother had bought a fake ticket from a novelty store just to add an extra layer of cruelty to her Thanksgiving performance. I brought the ticket closer to my face, squinting in the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station canopy. There was no fine print about this being a prank. There was only the official state lottery watermark, the intricate security patterns, and the undeniable impossible numbers glaring back at me. Jackpot. My hands began to shake with a violent tremor that had absolutely nothing to do with the winter weather. I fumbled in my coat pocket, my numb fingers struggling to grasp my phone. I dropped it once into the slush, snatched it back up, and wiped the screen against my sweater. I opened the official state lottery app, a program I had downloaded years ago and rarely used. My breath hitched in my throat as I tapped the ticket scanner icon. The camera frame popped up on the screen. I aligned the barcode on the back of the crumpled cardboard, my wrist vibrating so intensely I had to brace my elbow against the frozen roof of my sedan. The app processed for a second that stretched into eternity. A bright green checkmark appeared, followed by a digital confetti animation that felt obscenely cheerful against the backdrop of my shattered life. The text below it was brutally clear. Claim instructions for jackpot prize of $200 million. I dropped my coffee. The paper cup hit the pavement, splattering hot brown liquid across my boots and into the gray snow. But I did not even flinch. The air rushed out of my lungs as if I had been physically struck. $200 million. Before taxes. Even after the government took their massive cut, it was a level of wealth that defied comprehension. It was generation-altering money. It was buy the neighborhood and bulldoze it money. Suddenly, the isolated gas station felt incredibly exposed. The bright canopy lights felt like a spotlight pinning me to the asphalt. I whipped my head around, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The bored teenager was still inside, staring at his phone. A semi-truck rumbled past on the highway, entirely indifferent to my existence. No one was watching. No one knew that the freezing, tear-stained woman standing in a puddle of spilled coffee was suddenly the wealthiest person in a 50-mile radius. I shoved the ticket deep into the interior zippered pocket of my winter coat, pressing my hand flat against my chest to ensure it was secure. I scrambled into my car, slamming the door shut and immediately hitting the central locking button. The sharp click of the locks engaging offered a tiny illusion of safety. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel as the adrenaline flooded my system, overriding the cold, overriding the exhaustion, overriding the crushing grief of my parents' betrayal. My mother and Brianna were plotting to throw me out on the street to cover up an $80,000 debt. They thought I was a pathetic, penniless ghostwriter who could be swept away like dust. Terrence had laughed at my tax bracket. My father had clinked glasses to my sister's fraudulent luxury lifestyle. If they knew about this ticket, their cruelty would vanish instantly. They would descend upon me like vultures, armed with guilt trips, fake apologies, and intense demands for family loyalty. My mother would absolutely claim the ticket was legally hers since she purchased it. They would drag me into court, drain my energy, and try to chain me back to my role as their financial safety net. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was completely done being a victim. My mother had gifted Brianna a $13,000 cruise, thinking it was the ultimate flex of wealth and favoritism. She had handed me a piece of trash, entirely unaware she had just handed me the keys to an empire. I took a slow, deep breath, the frosty air filling my lungs. I was not going to tell a single soul, not my parents, not my sister, not even a friend. I would let them proceed with their eviction plan. I would let them show their true colors to the very bitter end. They wanted to play a ruthless game of money and status. Now I held the ultimate winning hand, and I was going to destroy their entire facade with it. The drive back to my downtown apartment felt like navigating a completely different reality. The snow had stopped leaving the city streets coated in a thick, treacherous layer of ice. But my grip on the steering wheel was rock solid. I pulled into the crumbling parking garage of my building, the fluorescent lights buzzing weakly overhead. Walking into my modest one-bedroom apartment, I did not bother turning on the lights. The neon glow from the street lamps below illuminated the worn hardwood floors and the second-hand desk where I spent 50 hours a week typing ghost-written articles. This place was my entire world. It was small, drafty in the winter, and smelled faintly of old radiator dust, but I paid for it. Or so I thought. I walked straight to my bookshelf, pulled out a hollowed-out copy of a classic novel I used for emergency cash, and slipped the $200 million ticket inside. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I sat in the dark, drinking black coffee, watching the digital clock on my microwave flash the hours away. My mind raced with calculations, plotting out my next moves with a clinical precision I never knew I possessed. I was waiting for the executioner to call. It happened at exactly 9 in the morning. My phone buzzed against the laminate countertop, vibrating with the caller ID reading, Howard Home. My father. He was a man who scheduled his entire life in 15-minute increments, meaning this call was an official agenda item. I cleared my throat, taking a slow sip of my coffee to ensure my voice was perfectly steady. I tapped the green answer button and held the phone to my ear. "Good morning, Dad," I said, my tone completely flat. There was no greeting on the other end. No inquiry about whether I had made it home safely through the blizzard after walking out of their Thanksgiving dinner. No mention of the abandoned turkey. Riley, my father, barked his voice, carrying the clipped transactional cadence he usually reserved for dealing with incompetent contractors. "We need to have a serious discussion about your living situation." I leaned back against my kitchen counter, staring at the book that held my new future. "I am listening," I replied. "Your mother and I have been reviewing our real estate portfolio." My father continued, completely bypassing any familial warmth. "The downtown apartment you are currently occupying has appreciated significantly in value. Given the current market conditions, we have decided to liquidate that asset. We are putting the unit up for sale effective immediately." He paused, likely expecting me to start crying or begging for more time. When I remained silent, he pushed forward, his tone growing more aggressive. "We are sending a formal 30-day eviction notice via certified mail this afternoon. You need to start packing your things. The real estate agent will be coming by on Monday to take listing photos, so I expect the place to be spotless. Hide your little freelance setup. We want it to look like a modern professional lives there." I let his cold, callous words hang in the air for a long moment. "You are selling my home with 30 days' notice right before Christmas," I stated, not as a complaint, but as a point of fact to see how far he would go to justify it. "It is not your home, Riley," my father snapped, the annoyance bleeding through his corporate facade. "It is our property. You have been paying a fraction of the market rent for years. We have subsidized your lack of ambition long enough. Brianna and Terrence are facing some unexpected financial restructuring, and they actually contribute to the family legacy. Your sister needs the equity from this sale to secure a new investment property. You are a single woman with no real career and no dependents. You can easily rent a studio out in the suburbs." It is time you stepped up and made a sacrifice for the people who actually matter in this family. The sheer audacity of his lie was breathtaking. Investment property. That was his euphemism for bailing Brianna out of $80,000 of credit card debt and a fraudulent luxury car rental. They were perfectly willing to throw their eldest daughter out into the freezing winter streets to protect the fragile ego of their golden child and the pride of her arrogant husband. A day ago, this conversation would have shattered me. I would have pleaded with him, offered to pay more rent, or internalized the blame and cried myself to sleep. Today, listening to his arrogant, demanding voice, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating thrill. I took another sip of my coffee. I understand, Dad, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I will have my things packed. The apartment will be spotless for the photographer on Monday. The line went dead silent for 3 seconds. My father was clearly thrown off balance by my immediate compliance. He had prepared for a massive fight. He had armed himself with cruel insults to beat down my resistance and force my submission. My absolute frictionless surrender left him swinging at empty air. Good, he finally muttered, clearing his throat awkwardly. See that you do. Do not make this harder than it has to be, Riley. He hung up without saying goodbye. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the call-ended screen. A sharp, genuine smile spread across my face. They wanted to play real estate Monopoly. They wanted to wield their financial power like a weapon to crush me and elevate Brianna. They had no idea that by kicking me out, they had just severed the very last string of obligation tying me to their sinking ship. I walked back over to the bookshelf and patted the spine of the hollowed-out novel. 30 days was more than enough time. I did not just need to find a new place to live. I needed to hire a small army of the most ruthless wealth managers and corporate attorneys the East Coast had to offer. It was time to go shopping. I did not go to a local bank. I did not call a neighborhood lawyer. I went straight to the top. Over the years, I had suffered through countless Thanksgiving dinners, listening to Terrence brag about the elite legal circles he desperately wanted to penetrate. His ultimate obsession was Harrison Caldwell, and Price, a global wealth management and corporate law firm that catered exclusively to the ultra-rich. Terrence had applied to their senior associate program twice and been summarily rejected both times, a fact my family conveniently ignored while praising his mediocre career. I found their Manhattan office number online and made the call. Getting past the gatekeepers at a firm that manages billions of dollars was not easy. The receptionist was trained to filter out anyone who did not already have a massive portfolio, but firmly stating I was initiating a 9-figure liquid asset transfer immediately bypassed her script. I secured a sit-down with their senior managing partner, David Caldwell himself. 3 days later, I walked into their glass-enclosed skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. I was still wearing the same sensible winter coat and scuffed boots my mother had openly mocked just last week. The junior associates in the lobby cast sideways judging glances at me, their tailored suits a stark contrast to my thrift store attire. I did not care. True power does not need to announce itself with a designer label. I walked into David Caldwell's expansive corner office, took a seat in a leather chair that cost more than my sedan, and slid my hollowed-out book across his immaculate mahogany desk. I need to establish a blind trust and a series of corporate shell companies, I told him, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any intimidation. I require absolute anonymity. Furthermore, I need aggressive representation to execute a highly specific rapid series of real estate and debt acquisitions within the next 2 weeks. Caldwell steepled his fingers, an amused, slightly patronizing smile playing on his lips. He looked at my worn coat and plain haircut. Miss Anderson, our firm requires a minimum retainer of $100,000 just to open a file. We cater to a very specific high net worth demographic. I recommend you seek counsel at a mid-tier firm more suited to your current financial reality. I opened the book, pulled out the winning scratch-off ticket, and placed it directly in the center of his desk. Will a $200 million jackpot cover your retainer fee? I asked, my tone ice cold. Caldwell's amused smile vanished instantly. He leaned forward, pulling his reading glasses from his breast pocket. He inspected the ticket, his eyes widening as he cross-referenced the serial numbers against the official state lottery database open on his monitor. The patronizing corporate shark evaporated. In his place sat a man who recognized raw, undeniable capital. "Welcome to Harrison Caldwell and Price, Miss Anderson," he said, his voice completely devoid of his previous arrogance. "How can we deploy your capital today?" Within 2 hours, I had an entire team of financial experts and legal pit bulls at my disposal. We established Apex Holdings, LLC, an anonymous corporate entity that would serve as my absolute financial shield. Caldwell's team arranged for the State Lottery Commission to pay the lump sum directly into the trust, exploiting a legal loophole that ensured my name would never appear on any public registry press release or tax record. The government taxes were brutal, slicing the $200 million down to roughly $120 million in cold, hard cash. But seeing that nine-figure balance hit my newly established private banking account was a physical shock that nearly knocked the wind out of me. I was officially a centimillionaire. I had more liquid capital sitting in a single checking account than my parents and Terrence could ever dream of accumulating in 10 lifetimes of their fake corporate posturing. Now I leaned across the table looking directly at Caldwell. "I need your acquisitions team to target a specific mortgage. My parents are attempting to take out a home equity loan on a downtown apartment building. I want Apex Holdings to buy that debt. I want to own their mortgage, and then I want to look into purchasing the paper on their primary estate in Greenwich." Caldwell did not ask questions about family loyalty. He simply nodded, taking notes. "Consider it done. We will acquire the debt through secondary corporate channels. They will never know who holds the strings." While I was sitting in a Manhattan skyscraper directing a fleet of financial sharks to dismantle my family's foundation, they were busy maintaining their loud, hollow facade. Brianna had started posting daily obnoxious updates from her Mediterranean cruise. My social media feed was clogged with photos of her holding champagne flutes on the upper deck, heavily filtered selfies in the ship's casino, and lengthy, boastful captions about how incredibly blessed she was to have a husband who spoiled her with luxury. I knew for a fact that cheap champagne was included in the basic drink package. The casino chips were likely bought on a high-interest credit line she could not afford, and the husband spoiling her was currently dodging calls from auto repo agencies back home. Terrence, meanwhile, had posted a lengthy, pretentious status on his professional networking page about the importance of family legacy and making tough real estate choices to optimize investment portfolios. He was literally bragging to his corporate connections about rendering his sister-in-law homeless, framing his cruelty as savvy financial strategy. They were exhausting themselves to project an image of wealth, fighting tooth and nail to keep up appearances and validate their own inflated egos. They were screaming into the void, demanding everyone look at how rich and successful they were, while secretly drowning in debt. They were playing checkers with pennies, completely unaware that I was quietly buying the entire board. I did not just want to buy the board. I wanted to know exactly how fragile their plastic game pieces really were. The next morning, I sat in a high-tech conference room on the 44th floor with two former federal prosecutors who now worked as corporate investigators for Caldwell's firm. I handed them a sleek black folder containing Terrence and Brianna's basic information. "I want a complete financial and legal forensic sweep of these two," I instructed the lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Vance. "Leave no bank account unverified, no credit check unpulled, and no tax filing unexamined. I want to know where every single penny they claim to have comes from and exactly where it goes." Vance barely blinked at the aggressive request. "Standard procedure for our high-net-worth clients conducting hostile takeovers, Miss Anderson," she assured me. "Give us 48 hours." They only needed 36. When Vance called me back into the conference room 2 days later, the stack of documents waiting on the glass table was thick enough to serve as a doorstop. The reality of my sister's glamorous lifestyle was actually much worse than the $80,000 in consumer debt I had overheard her crying about in the pantry. Brianna had essentially been running a one-woman Ponzi scheme to fund her designer wardrobe and country club appearances. Vance produced a detailed, itemized list of Brianna's recent transactions. The sheer volume of frivolous spending was staggering. While I had been budgeting my grocery runs down to the last cent to ensure I could pay my parents' rent on time, my sister had been dropping $3,000 on custom handbags, booking weekend spa retreats under assumed names, and paying exorbitant monthly fees to exclusive social clubs just to take selfies by the pool. She had opened 6 different credit cards under variations of her maiden name to bypass Terrence's initial credit alerts. When those maxed out, she turned to predatory payday loans with interest rates bordering on extortion. She was hemorrhaging money to project an aura of effortless wealth to her online followers and our gullible parents. The luxury car in my parents' driveway was not just a bounced rental. She had forged my father's signature as a co-signer to secure the vehicle when her own credit failed the background check. My parents were completely unaware they were legally on the hook for a $90,000 depreciating asset that was currently slated for aggressive repossession. The Mediterranean cruise they had just gifted her was likely the only vacation she had taken this year that was not financed by a high-yield microloan. But the most explosive revelation was not Brianna's reckless spending. It was Terrence. I had assumed his arrogant ignorance was just typical narcissism. I figured he was simply too busy admiring his own reflection to notice his wife bankrupting them. I was wrong. Terrence knew absolutely everything. Vance pulled up a series of highlighted bank transfers on the digital projector. "Your brother-in-law is a senior tax attorney," she stated, her voice laced with professional disgust. "He is legally obligated to maintain pristine financial records. When he discovered the depth of his wife's insolvency 6 months ago, rather than liquidating assets or filing for bankruptcy, which would have destroyed his partnership prospects at his firm, he decided to creatively restructure their debt." Creatively restructure was putting it mildly. Terrence had used his position at his mid-tier law firm to set up a dummy corporate account. He funneled a portion of his clients' retainer fees through this account to temporarily float Brianna's minimum payments and hide the massive debt-to-income ratio from the IRS. It was a blatant, highly illegal mingling of personal liabilities and client funds. I remembered the way he had smirked at my sweater, offering to help me write it off. All the while, the supposed legal genius was logging into his firm's secure portal late at night, sweating bullets as he desperately shifted client retainer fees into an offshore dummy account, just to stop the repo men from towing his wife's rented car out of my parents' driveway. The level of sociopathic detachment required to sit at a Thanksgiving table and mock someone else's honest, hard-earned income while actively committing wire fraud was staggering. He was shifting money back and forth at the end of every month just to avoid triggering an internal audit. He was one mistransfer away from complete disbarment and a federal indictment for wire fraud. He was not a high-powered corporate shark. He was a desperate, panicked fraudster walking a legal tightrope over a very long drop. Vance slid a separate red folder across the glass table. "It gets more interesting, Miss Anderson. Terrence's current employer, the law firm of Sterling and Vance, is highly leveraged. They rely entirely on their pristine ethical reputation to retain their corporate clients. If even a whisper of a senior attorney commingling client funds to cover his wife's secret credit card debt reaches their managing partners, Terrence will not just be fired. They will sacrifice him to the ethics board immediately to save their own skin." I picked up the red folder, feeling the heavy, satisfying weight of absolute leverage in my hands. Terrence had always used his legal credentials as a club to batter me into submission. My parents worshipped the ground he walked on simply because he had a prestigious title attached to his name. They were willing to render me homeless just to protect this man's fragile ego and fraudulent lifestyle. I wanted to see what would happen when that precious title was stripped away. I looked up at Vance, my mind working with a ruthless clarity. "I do not want to alert the authorities or the ethics board just yet," I instructed. "If he goes to prison today, he escapes the social humiliation. I want his firm to find out, but I want to control the delivery method. Can Apex Holdings quietly buy a controlling interest in the commercial real estate building where his law firm leases their office space?" Vance raised an eyebrow, a spark of genuine respect flashing in her eyes. "Yes. They occupy the top 3 floors of a building in the financial district. The property group that owns it has been looking to offload the asset to generate quick liquidity. We can acquire the building through a subsidiary shell company by the end of the week. Do it, I said without hesitation. And once the building is ours, I want you to initiate a comprehensive audit of all tenant lease agreements. Flag his law firm for a routine financial review as their new landlord. We will casually request their internal compliance reports to ensure our new tenants meet our stringent ethical standards. Make the request look entirely standard, but specific enough that Terrence's managing partners are forced to open their own books. It was a beautiful, invisible trap. I was going to force Terrence's own bosses to discover his fraud. They would find the mingled funds, the dummy accounts, and the desperate transfers. They would realize their star attorney was a massive walking liability. And Terrence would never even know it was the freelance ghostwriter he so openly despised pulling the strings from the shadows. I closed the red folder and slid it into my bag next to the hollowed-out book. My parents had given me 30 days to pack up my life and quietly disappear into the background so their golden child could shine. They wanted to sell my apartment to save a marriage built on lies and stolen money. They thought they held all the power because they owned the deed to a single modest property. They had no idea they had just forced me to build a financial guillotine, and Terrence had willingly placed his own head right on the chopping block. I walked out of the conference room and straight into Caldwell's private office. Terrence was handled. His professional demise was already locked into an inescapable countdown. Now it was time to address the architects of this toxic family dynamic, my parents. I sat across from Caldwell and a ruthless, sharp-featured real estate attorney named Pierce. I want to buy my parents' debt, I told them plainly. Both the downtown apartment I am currently living in and their primary estate in Greenwich. I want every single piece of paper tying them to a physical property transferred to Apex Holdings. Pierce pulled up a digital dossier on a massive flat-screen monitor mounted to the mahogany wall. He tapped his stylus against the screen, bringing up a web of financial charts. Your parents project a very aggressive image of generational wealth, Miss Anderson. He began, his tone dry and analytical. But the reality is significantly less glamorous. They are entirely cash poor. They have refinanced the Greenwich estate 3 separate times over the last 15 years to maintain their lifestyle and fund your sister's various endeavors. They currently hold a massive adjustable rate mortgage with a regional bank. Furthermore, the interest rate is set to adjust upward next quarter, which will nearly double their monthly payment. I let out a harsh, disbelieving breath. My mother had just mocked my shoes and my homemade turkey, acting as though she were royalty. Meanwhile, she and my father were effectively drowning in adjustable rate mortgage debt, living month to month on a highly leveraged prayer. They were sacrificing my home, the only property they had any actual equity in, just to patch the holes in a sinking ship. Can we buy the debt? I asked, leaning forward, the thrill of the hunt suddenly surging through my veins. Pierce smiled, a predatory corporate smile. Absolutely. Regional banks are currently desperate for liquidity. They routinely package and sell off residential mortgages on the secondary market to free up capital. Apex Holdings will establish a subsidiary shell corporation, let us call it Zenith Property Solutions. Zenith will approach the regional bank and offer to buy a bundled portfolio of premium residential debt at a slightly inflated premium. We will bury your parents' mortgages inside a larger package of 20 other properties, so the bank does not suspect we are targeting the Andersons specifically. The bank gets a massive immediate cash injection, and Zenith becomes the sole owner of the promissory notes. How fast can you execute this? I asked. With the capital you have sitting in our private accounts, Caldwell interjected, looking at his watch. I can have the wire transfers authorized and the deeds reassigned before Wall Street closes on Friday. Your parents will not even know the transaction occurred until they receive a standard automated administrative letter in the mail, instructing them to route all future mortgage payments to a new corporate address. Do it, I commanded. And make sure Zenith Property Solutions is buried under so many layers of corporate anonymity that a federal investigator could not tie it back to me. For the next 48 hours, I sat in the corner of that sleek glass-enclosed conference room and watched a masterclass in aggressive wealth deployment. The sheer speed at which money moved when you had enough of it was breathtaking. I drank black coffee from porcelain cups, while Caldwell's team of junior associates drafted acquisition contracts, established Delaware-based LLCs, and routed tens of millions of dollars through secure banking channels. It was a complex, beautiful, and utterly ruthless ballet of corporate maneuvering. I watched lines of code flash across monitors representing the transfer of the exact properties my family used to assert their dominance over me. The Greenwich estate, with its pristine, manicured lawns, crystal chandeliers, and grand oak doors, where I had been insulted and belittled my entire life, was quietly being purchased out from under them. The downtown apartment, the one they were planning to throw me out of in the dead of winter, was being legally bound to a holding company I controlled entirely. The psychological thrill of holding the strings was intoxicating. For 33 years, I had been the powerless, invisible ghostwriter, sitting in the corner absorbing their disdain. They had wielded their financial status like a blunt instrument, using it to bludgeon me into submission and elevate Brianna into a false idol. They truly believed that owning property made them untouchable gods. Now I was the invisible hand pulling the levers of their entire existence. I owned the roof over their heads. I owned the ground they walked on. I was their bank, their landlord, and their ultimate judge, and they were completely oblivious. On Friday afternoon, Pierce walked into the conference room and slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio onto the glass table directly in front of me. The transaction is complete. Miss Anderson, he stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Zenith Property Solutions now holds the exclusive promissory notes and deeds of trust for both the downtown apartment and the Greenwich estate. You are officially their primary creditor. If they miss a single payment, or if we choose to accelerate the terms of the loan based on the upcoming rate adjustment, you have the unilateral power to initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings. I slowly traced my fingers over the embossed leather cover of the portfolio. The power contained within those pages was staggering. I had just spent nearly $15 million securing the financial ruin of my own family, and it felt like the best investment I had ever made. Thank you, Pierce, I said, standing up and tucking the portfolio under my arm. You and your team have performed exceptionally well. I walked out of the Harrison Caldwell and Price building, stepping onto the bustling Manhattan pavement. The freezing winter air hit my face, but I did not shiver. I felt completely invincible. I took the train back to my downtown apartment, the very property my parents were supposedly kicking me out of. When I arrived at my building, I checked the small, dented brass mailbox in the lobby. Inside, resting perfectly on top of a stack of junk mail, was a thick envelope sent via certified mail. The return address belonged to my father's personal attorney. I unlocked my apartment door, tossed my keys onto the counter, and tore open the envelope. It was the formal 30-day eviction notice. The legal jargon was cold and precise, informing me that my month-to-month tenancy was being terminated, effective immediately due to the impending sale of the property. I was ordered to vacate the premises and remove all personal belongings before the 24th of December, precisely one day before Christmas. They had actually timed my eviction to ruin my holidays, ensuring I would be scrambling to find a moving truck while they celebrated their newly secured home equity loan. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from my mother. The real estate photographer is arriving at noon on Monday. I expect the apartment to be entirely decluttered. Do not leave your writing materials out. We need the space to look expensive to attract high-end buyers. I looked down at the eviction notice in my left hand and the heavy leather portfolio containing the deed to the entire building in my right. I let out a loud, genuine laugh that echoed off the bare walls of my living room. They were so fiercely determined to sell an apartment they no longer even owned. They were marching blindly toward a cliff, completely unaware that I had just purchased the entire mountain. I pulled out my phone and typed a quick, polite response to my mother. Absolutely, Mom. The apartment will look spectacular for the photos. I tossed the phone onto the couch. Let them take their photos. Let them list the property. Let them try to secure their fraudulent home equity loan to bail out Brianna's maxed-out credit cards. I was going to let them build their house of cards as high as they possibly could, right up until the moment I pulled out the bottom row and watched the entire structure collapse. I spent the weekend clearing away my personal items, stripping the apartment down to a sterile, generic aesthetic. It was not an act of submission, it was stage dressing. When the real estate photographer arrived on Monday morning, I greeted him with a warm, cooperative smile. He snapped wide-angle photos of the exposed brick walls and the city skyline view, entirely oblivious to the fact that he was documenting property I already owned, lock, stock, and barrel. As the photographer packed up his lighting equipment and headed for the elevator, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A notification popped up on the screen, followed by a rapid succession of aggressive pings. It was Brianna. She was thousands of miles away, floating somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea, but her desperate need for validation transcended international waters. I unlocked my phone and opened the message thread. My screen was immediately flooded with high-resolution images of aggressively curated luxury. There was a photo of Brianna lounging on a private balcony in a designer bikini, a turquoise ocean stretching out behind her. Another photo showed a bucket of premium vintage champagne, chilling in silver ice, alongside a plate of caviar. The third image was of Terrence standing at the helm of a chartered private yacht, wearing a crisp white linen suit and a pair of $1,000 sunglasses, looking every bit the master of the universe he pretended to be. Morning from Monaco. Brianna texted, adding a string of sparkling emojis. Just thought I would share the view since your window probably just looks out at a brick wall. Terrence rented us a private yacht for the afternoon. The captain literally waits on us hand and foot. It is exhausting being this pampered. I leaned against my kitchen counter, staring at the photo of Terrence grinning in his tailored linen suit. I pictured the thick red folder sitting securely in my lawyer's safe back in Manhattan. I knew for an absolute fact that the private yacht charter had been paid for using a diverted client retainer fee from his law firm. He was sailing across the French Riviera on stolen corporate money, grinning like a king while standing directly on a financial trapdoor. Looks incredibly expensive, I texted back, keeping my tone carefully neutral to bait her further. Oh, it is, Brianna replied almost instantly. But you know Terrence, only the best for his wife. He said after all the stress of dealing with my family, I deserved a proper escape. It is just so nice having a husband who can provide this level of security. Speaking of stress, Mom texted me that you got your eviction notice. How is the packing going? I let out a soft, echoing chuckle. She could not resist. Even while vacationing on another continent on a $13,000 cruise ticket, she had to reach across the globe just to twist the knife. The packing is going exactly as it should, I typed. The photographer just left. Mom and Dad are very eager to get this place on the market. Well, do not be too bitter about it, Brianna wrote back. Mom and Dad have to look out for their real investments. Terrence and I are building a legacy, and that takes capital. You have just been squatting in that apartment doing nothing with your life. It is honestly pathetic that you are 33 and still relying on their charity. Have you started looking for a new place yet? I heard there are some really affordable studios out by the industrial park. You might even be able to find one that accepts food stamps. I read the text twice. The sheer blinding arrogance was almost impressive. She was $80,000 in the hole. Her luxury car was one missed payment away from being towed out of my parents' driveway by aggressive repo men. Her husband was actively committing wire fraud to keep her dripping in designer brands. My parents were about to take out a predatory home equity loan just to stop her from going bankrupt. And yet she was lecturing me about building a legacy and relying on charity. I am not worried about my living situation, I replied. I have secured a property that perfectly suits my needs. You just focus on enjoying your vacation. Oh, I am, she shot back. We have a VIP reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant tonight. Terrence is wearing a custom tuxedo. You should see the way people look at us here, Riley. They know we belong in this world. It is a shame you will never get to experience anything like this. I guess that $1 scratch-off ticket did not magically turn your life around, huh? You should have saved it to pay for your moving truck. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the cold, calculating energy wash over me. The old Riley would have typed out a defensive emotional paragraph justifying her career or simply thrown the phone across the room in tears. The new Riley, the one backed by a ruthless team of Manhattan lawyers and a 9-figure bank account, simply smiled. I opened the keyboard and typed my final response to her. "You are absolutely right, Brianna. People definitely see exactly who you and Terrence are. I want you to take a lot of pictures tonight. Order the most expensive wine on the menu. Wear your best designer dress. Soak in every single ounce of that first-class VIP luxury. Breathe in the ocean air and memorize exactly how it feels to have people wait on you hand and foot. Enjoy every single second of it, Brianna. Because I promise you that is the absolute last trip you are ever going to take." I hit send and watched the message mark as delivered. I saw the typing bubble appear on my screen as Brianna started to respond. Then the bubble vanished. A minute passed. 2 minutes. The bubble appeared again briefly, then disappeared for good. She was confused. My response did not fit the script. I had not defended myself, I had not cried, and I had not lashed out in blind anger. I had delivered a cold, undeniable promise that unsettled her deeply. I locked my phone screen and tossed it onto the kitchen counter. The game was perfectly set. My parents were listing a building they did not own to secure a loan they would never receive. Terrence was flying back to a law firm that was currently undergoing a hostile internal audit commanded by his new landlord. Brianna was sailing home to a driveway empty of her luxury car and a mountain of debt she could no longer hide. They had exactly 3 weeks until the annual family Christmas party. 3 weeks of living in their beautiful, fragile glass house before I showed up with a sledgehammer. Those 3 weeks evaporated in a blur of silent, lethal corporate execution. I watched from the digital dashboard of Apex Holdings as the trap snapped shut around my family, inch by inch. The home equity loan my parents applied for was abruptly denied by their regional bank, a direct consequence of their mortgage being sold off to my shell company. They were currently locked in an administrative nightmare, frantic and bleeding cash, but desperate to maintain their holiday facade. On the evening of the annual Anderson Christmas party, a heavy, pristine layer of snow coated the sweeping lawns of the Greenwich estate. I pulled my battered 10-year-old sedan up to the front gates. The hired valet, accustomed to handling imported sports cars and luxury SUVs, stared at my vehicle with undisguised apprehension. I handed him the keys with a polite smile, relishing the visual pollution my rusty car brought to the perfectly manicured circular driveway. I stepped out into the freezing air, dressed with deliberate, calculated simplicity. I wore a plain black turtleneck, dark slacks, and sensible scuffed flat boots. I looked exactly like the impoverished, struggling ghostwriter my mother desperately needed me to be. I carried no designer handbag, only a sleek, unassuming black leather portfolio tucked tightly under my arm. Inside that portfolio were the authenticated, notarized deeds to the very ground I was walking on. The moment I pushed open the massive oak front doors, a wave of heat-loud laughter and the scent of expensive pine hit my face. My parents had outdone themselves this year, pushing their maxed-out credit lines to the absolute limit. A towering 12-foot Douglas fir dominated the grand foyer, dripping in crystal ornaments. A live string quartet played festive classical music from the landing of the sweeping mahogany staircase. Hired wait staff in crisp white shirts and black bow ties circulated through the crowd, carrying trays of imported caviar and vintage champagne. It was a glittering, desperate monument to their own vanity. I navigated through the sea of wealthy guests, keeping a low profile. I spotted Brianna instantly. She was holding court near the massive stone fireplace, her skin unnaturally dark from a spray tan meant to simulate her Mediterranean cruise. She wore a shimmering, backless crimson gown, laughing loudly and tossing her hair as she recounted fabricated stories of private yacht charters to a group of older, wealthy socialites. Across the room, Terrence was performing his own arrogant routine. He stood in a tight circle with 3 older, distinguished men in custom-tailored suits. I recognized them immediately from my corporate research. They were the senior managing partners at Sterling and Vance Terrence's law firm. Terrence was grinning confidently, holding a glass of bourbon, gesturing expansively as he spoke. He had absolutely no idea that the men he was trying to impress had spent the last 48 hours tearing apart his financial records, following a brutal anonymous audit demand from their new commercial landlord. The guillotine blade was already falling toward his neck, and he was smiling right at it. Before I could move further into the room, a sharp, perfectly manicured hand clamped down on my elbow with vice-like force. I turned to see my mother, Eleanor. She wore an emerald green silk dress, her neck heavy with diamond jewelry she had undoubtedly leveraged against the house she no longer owned. Her eyes swept over my plain black turtleneck and slacks, her face contorting in an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "What on earth are you wearing?" she hissed, dragging me out of the main walkway and pulling me into the shadows near the kitchen entrance. "This is a formal holiday gala, Riley. You look like you are showing up for a shift at a coal mine. I specifically told you to stay away if you could not bother to dress the part." I kept my expression perfectly serene, looking down at her hand gripping my arm. "I thought I should dress practically, Mom," I replied, my tone mild and even. "Moving is dirty work after all. Since you are throwing me out of my apartment tomorrow, I wanted to be prepared." My mother scoffed, her eyes darting around to ensure none of her wealthy friends were listening. "Do not use that tone with me. You are lucky we even allowed you to stay until Christmas Eve. Your father and I are under immense stress managing our real estate portfolio, and your lack of cooperation is exhausting. The bank has been ridiculously slow with our paperwork, so we have to entertain some very important loan officers tonight to grease the wheels." She released my arm, brushing her hands together as if touching my sweater had soiled her skin. "Since you insisted on showing up and ruining the aesthetic of my party, you are going to make yourself useful. The catering staff is completely overwhelmed. 2 of the servers called out sick this morning." She turned to a nearby catering cart, picked up a heavy silver tray loaded with freshly poured champagne flutes, and shoved it aggressively against my chest. I caught it instinctively, the crystal glasses chiming against each other. "You are going to serve drinks," my mother commanded, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. "You are going to walk through this room, keep your mouth shut, and hand out champagne. Do not engage in conversation. Do not tell anyone you are related to us. If any of Terrence's law partners ask you, our temporary help hired for the evening. Do you understand me, Riley? I will not have you embarrassing Brianna in front of her husband's superiors." I looked down at the silver tray in my hands. The sparkling golden liquid caught the light of the chandeliers above. My own mother, standing in a house she no longer held the deed to, was ordering a centimillionaire to play the role of a nameless servant, just to protect the fragile ego of a wire fraudster. It was a level of poetic irony so profound it almost felt scripted. I looked back up at her, allowing a small, cold smile to touch the corners of my mouth, a smile she entirely misinterpreted as submission. "Of course, Mom," I said softly, my voice dripping with dangerous, calm compliance. "I would be more than happy to serve your guests tonight. I will make sure Terrence and his partners get exactly what they deserve." My mother rolled her eyes, already dismissing me from her mind. "Just do your job and stay out of sight," she snapped, turning on her heel to rush back toward a group of wealthy wives. I stood alone by the kitchen doors, balancing the silver tray on one hand, while adjusting the leather portfolio tightly under my arm. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the solid oak floors beneath my boots. My floors, my house, my rules. I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly into the glittering, crowded room, heading straight for Terrence and the senior partners of Sterling and Vance. It was time to start pouring the drinks. The distance between the kitchen doors and the grand fireplace felt like a runway designed exclusively for my victory lap. I moved through the sea of glittering evening gowns and bespoke tuxedos with the smooth, practiced grace of a phantom. No one paid me any mind. In a room fueled by wealth and status, a woman wearing a plain black turtleneck carrying a silver tray of drinks is entirely invisible. I used that invisibility to my advantage, weaving past groups of laughing socialites and local politicians until I reached the epicenter of arrogant gravity. Terrence stood with his back to the roaring fire, holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He was flanked by 2 older, distinguished white men. I recognized them instantly from the digital dossiers Caldwell had provided. To Terrence's left stood Richard Prescott, the senior managing partner of the firm, a man whose normally ruddy complexion looked distinctly pale and drawn tonight. To his right was Arthur Sinclair, the head of corporate compliance, who was gripping his champagne flute so tightly his knuckles were white. They did not look like men enjoying a lavish holiday gala. They looked like men standing on the deck of a sinking ship, desperately pretending the water pooling around their ankles was just spilled wine. Terrence, however, was completely oblivious to his superior's mounting panic. He was mid-story, gesturing expansively with his free hand, his booming voice carrying over the string quartet. "I tell my junior associates all the time," Terrence boasted, flashing his perfectly bleached teeth. "Success in corporate tax law is not just about billable hours. It is about understanding the aggressive nature of wealth generation. You have to be willing to make the hard choices. Just this week, I advised my in-laws to liquidate an underperforming residential property. The tenant was family, actually. But you cannot let sentimentality dilute your asset portfolio. You have to trim the dead weight to protect the legacy." Prescott offered a weak, distracted nod, his eyes darting toward his phone vibrating in his suit pocket. Sinclair simply stared into the fire, looking physically ill. I stepped into their tight circle, the silver tray balanced perfectly on my fingertips, my leather portfolio pressed securely between my ribs and my elbow. "Champagne, gentlemen," I asked, my voice polite, deferential, and cutting clearly through Terrence's monologue. Terrence turned around, his initial annoyance at the interruption morphing into a wide, malicious grin the moment he recognized my face. He looked me up and down, taking in my scuffed boots and plain sweater, his chest puffing out with overwhelming superiority. "Ah, perfect timing," Terrence declared loudly, ensuring the guests standing nearby could hear him. "Mr. Prescott, Mr. Sinclair, I would love for you to meet Riley. She is my wife's older sister." Prescott blinked, dragging his attention away from his phone to look at me. "Your sister-in-law is serving drinks at the party," he asked, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his stressed features. Terrence chuckled, a deep, condescending sound that vibrated in his chest. "We believe in teaching the value of a strong work ethic in this family. Riley has unfortunately struggled to find a real career path. She does freelance writing on the internet. Since she is currently facing eviction from her apartment and moving is quite expensive, we thought it would be a generous gesture to let her work the floor tonight. A little pocket money goes a long way when you are starting over at the bottom." He reached out and plucked a fresh glass of champagne from my tray, sipping it while maintaining unblinking eye contact with me. "It builds character," he added smoothly. "Someone has to do the heavy lifting for the rest of us." I did not flinch. I did not look away. I held the silver tray absolutely steady, letting his insults hang in the warm air of the living room. I looked at Terrence, this hollow shell of a man wrapped in an expensive suit, and felt a profound sense of clinical detachment. "Terrence is always so incredibly generous with other people's assets," I said, my voice soft, but carrying a razor-sharp edge that made Sinclair snap his head up to look at me. Terrence's smirk tightened into a scowl. "Watch your tone, Riley," he commanded, dropping the jovial facade and leaning in close to intimidate me. "Just pour the drinks and head back to the kitchen where you belong. You are embarrassing yourself." I ignored him entirely. I turned my gaze directly to the two senior partners, Mr. Prescott, Mr. Sinclair. "I must say you both look remarkably tense for a holiday celebration, though I suppose facing a comprehensive forensic ethical audit from a completely anonymous commercial landlord would ruin anyone's festive spirit." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Prescott dropped his phone. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter. Sinclair choked on his champagne, coughing violently into his fist. The color drained completely from both of their faces, leaving them looking like polished corpses. Terrence looked back and forth between his bosses and me, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, stepping toward me. "Mr. Prescott, ignore her. She reads conspiracy theories online. She is clearly having some sort of mental break due to the stress of her eviction." I kept my eyes locked on Prescott, who was staring at me with wide, terrified realization. "I do read quite a bit," I agreed smoothly. "I also know your firm has spent the last 48 hours in a state of absolute unmitigated panic. You have locked your junior associates out of the system and spent 2 sleepless nights frantically reviewing internal compliance reports because your new landlord mandated an ethical review of all tenant lease agreements. A rather aggressive, highly specific move from Apex Holdings, would you not agree? Sinclair took a step forward, his voice trembling. Who are you? He demanded, completely ignoring Terrence. How do you know that name? Terrence grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging painfully into my sweater. I said, that is enough, Riley. You are out of line. You are going to leave this house right now before I call security. I looked down at his hand gripping my shoulder, then looked back up into his eyes. My expression was so cold, so devoid of any human empathy that he instinctively released his grip and stepped back. I am just the temporary help. As Terrence so eloquently stated, I said, projecting my voice so the surrounding guests began to turn and stare. But speaking of temporary things, Terrence, I have a professional question for you. Have you finalized the reconciliation on your client trust accounts for this quarter yet? Terrence froze. The confident, arrogant lawyer vanished, replaced by a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for the ground to hit him. What he whispered, his voice cracking. I tilted my head, offering him a smile of pure, concentrated venom. I hear the State Ethics Board severely frowns upon senior attorneys using client retainer fees to finance luxury Mediterranean cruises and rent European sports cars for their wives. I imagine an audit of those specific dummy accounts would be catastrophic. Prescott spun around to face Terrence, his eyes blazing with a mixture of horror and homicidal rage. You commingled client funds, Prescott roared, completely forgetting where he was. You stole from the retainer accounts. Terrence held up both hands, his face sweating profusely despite the freezing weather outside. No, Richard. No, she is lying. I swear to you, she is making this up. She is a jealous, broke freelancer trying to ruin my reputation. She just named the holding company that bought our building on Friday. Sinclair yelled, stepping into Terrence's personal space. A holding company that no one outside of our executive board knows exists. She knows about the audit. How does she know about the audit, Terrence? Because I am the one who ordered it, I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the now silent section of the living room. Terrence whipped his head back to me, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. You ordered it, he stammered, his mind short-circuiting. You do not have the authority to order an audit. You do not have any money. You are getting evicted tomorrow. I shifted the silver tray into my left hand and pulled the sleek black leather portfolio from under my arm. I unclasped the metal buckle and pulled out a stack of heavy watermarked legal documents. I held them up, letting the crystal chandelier light catch the official state seals. I am not getting evicted, Terrence, I said, savoring every single syllable as it left my lips. Because you cannot be evicted from a property you legally own. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The entire grand foyer fell dead silent. Everyone was watching us now. My mother was pushing her way through the crowd, her face a mask of furious panic. But she was too late. The trap had already sprung, and Terrence's entire world was crumbling into dust right before his eyes. My mother finally broke through the ring of stunned guests, grabbing my wrist with her manicured fingers. What are you doing? Eleanor hissed, her voice vibrating with a frantic, suppressed hysteria. Put those fake papers away immediately. You are humiliating your sister. I looked down at her hand, then back up to her panicked eyes. I smoothly pulled my arm out of her grasp. There is no fake paperwork here, Mom, I said, my voice projecting clearly in the silent room. I am just giving Terrence a quick lesson in corporate tax law and real estate acquisition. My father Howard arrived right behind her. He tried to quickly assess the situation, pasting on his best country club smile to placate Terrence's bosses. Richard Arthur, my father said, extending his hands in a gesture of false camaraderie. I apologize for the disruption. My eldest daughter has a flair for the dramatic. She is going through a tough time financially and is lashing out. Prescott did not even look at my father. His eyes remained locked on Terrence with a lethal intensity. Sinclair stepped away from my father as if the man were contagious. I turned my attention fully to my parents. I am not lashing out, Dad. I am simply clarifying my living situation since you so generously informed me of my eviction via certified mail this week. I brought the updated documentation so you can update your records. I held out the first stack of thick watermarked pages. My father took them reflexively, his corporate smile freezing on his face. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the top page. It was the deed of trust and the promissory note for my downtown apartment. "This is garbage," my mother snapped, trying to snatch the papers from his hands. "We own that building. We are listing it on Monday. The photographer already took the pictures. You are packing your bags this weekend, Riley, and no amount of fabricated legal nonsense is going to change that." "Keep reading, Dad," I instructed, ignoring her entirely. "Look at the assignee." My father flipped to the second page, his brow furrowing. "Zenith Property Solutions," he read aloud, his voice dropping an octave. "Acquired via secondary market transfer from First Regional Bank. What is this? Riley? First Regional holds our mortgage." "Held," I corrected him sharply. "Past tense. First Regional Bank held your mortgage. They sold it on Friday afternoon to free up liquidity. Zenith Property Solutions bought it at a premium. And I am the sole anonymous beneficiary of the holding company that owns Zenith Property Solutions. That means I own the debt. I own the paper. I am your landlord and you cannot evict me from my own home." My mother let out a shrill, mocking laugh. "You own the debt, you. You type blog posts in sweatpants. You could not afford the closing costs on a garden shed, let alone buy out a commercial mortgage. Howard, tear that garbage up and call security." "Eleanor, stop!" My father whispered, his face draining of color. His hands began to shake as he flipped to the notarized bank transfer confirmations attached to the back of the packet. He recognized the official seals. He recognized the signature of his own bank's loan officer. The reality of the ink on the page was bypassing his denial and hitting him right in the chest. "These are official bank transfer receipts. The debt has been reassigned." "Let me see that," Brianna demanded, pushing her way into the circle. Her fake Mediterranean spray tan looked almost orange against the sudden pallor of her face. She grabbed the papers from my father, her eyes scanning the legal jargon she barely understood. "Mom, what does this mean? Does she own the apartment? What about my loan?" "Your loan was denied," I stated cleanly. "That home equity loan you and Mom were trying to secure to bail out your $80,000 in credit card debt and pay off your fraudulent luxury car rental. The bank rejected it on Friday because the underlying asset was sold out from under them." Brianna gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. Her hands flew to her mouth. "You listen to us!" my mother shrieked, all pretense of high society elegance vanishing. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You spied on us in our own home. You vindictive, jealous little brat." "I did not have to spy very hard," I replied, balancing the silver tray of champagne effortlessly on one hand. "You plotted to render me homeless in a pantry with paper-thin walls. But you are missing the bigger picture here, Mom. You are so focused on the downtown apartment that you have not even asked about the rest of the portfolio." I reached into the black leather folder under my arm and pulled out the second, significantly thicker stack of documents. I dropped them directly onto the silver tray among the crystal champagne flutes and held the tray out toward my father. "Take it," I commanded. My father reached out with trembling hands and picked up the heavy stack. He stared at the bold, capitalized letters on the cover page. The silence in the grand foyer was absolute. Every wealthy neighbor, every local politician, every socialite my parents had spent decades trying to impress was watching a man realize his entire existence had just been purchased. "What is it, Howard?" my mother demanded, her voice cracking with mounting hysteria. "What does it say?" My father could not speak. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. He stared at the address listed on the deed of trust. It was the address of the very ground we were standing on, the Greenwich estate. "I will save you the trouble of translating the legalese," I said, projecting my voice so it carried up to the vaulted ceiling. "Your primary estate has been refinanced 3 times in the last 15 years. You have a massive adjustable rate mortgage that you are barely keeping afloat. When Zenith Property Solutions approached your bank to buy the debt on my apartment, we bundled it with the mortgage on this house. I bought it all." "No," my mother whispered, shaking her head aggressively. "No, that is impossible. That is a $15 million estate. You do not have that kind of money. You are broke. You are a failure. I own the promissory note to this house." I continued stepping closer to her, my voice dropping to a lethal, quiet intensity. You are my debtors. I own the roof over your head. I own the crystal chandelier you are standing under. I own the driveway where Brianna parked her unpaid rental car. And since your interest rate is scheduled to adjust upward next quarter, an adjustment you absolutely cannot afford, now that your equity loan was denied, you will default. And when you do, I will foreclose on you without a second thought. This is a trick! Brianna yelled, her voice bordering on a screech. She turned to Terrence, who was still frozen in terror under the murderous glare of his bosses. Terrence, do something. Tell them this is illegal. Tell them she is lying. Terrence did not move. He did not speak. He was entirely consumed by the realization that his own career was ending. He looked at the documents in my father's hands, then looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated dread. He knew exactly what aggressive wealth deployment looked like. He recognized the pristine, airtight legal structuring of Harrison, Caldwell, and Price. He knew I had him, and he knew I had them. Terrence cannot help you, Brianna, I said cheerfully. Terrence is currently trying to figure out how to explain his offshore dummy accounts and wire fraud to the State Ethics Board. I imagine he is going to be very busy retaining criminal defense counsel. Howard, do something! My mother shrieked, grabbing my father's arm and shaking it. Tell them she is lying. Tell them to throw her out. My father looked up from the documents, his eyes completely hollowed out. The arrogant, status-obsessed patriarch had been entirely hollowed out, replaced by a man staring at his own financial execution. The seals are real, Eleanor, he whispered, his voice trembling. The signatures are real. The bank sold our debt. She owns the mortgage. How? My mother screamed, turning back to me, her eyes wide and manic. How did you do this? Where did you get the money? You are a ghostwriter. You have nothing. You are nothing. The crowd of guests was murmuring now, a low, buzzing wave of shock and scandal rippling through the room. The people my parents had spent their entire lives trying to impress were watching them be exposed as leveraged, debt-ridden frauds. The facade was shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. I looked at the people who had treated me like a disposable asset my entire life. I looked at the mother who had thrown a $1 ticket at me and told me I was wasting the food on her table. I looked at the father who had ordered me to pack up my life so he could bail out his golden child. I am not a failure, Mom, I said, my voice ringing with absolute unshakable authority. I am the bank, and your account is heavily overdrawn. My mother took a step toward me. Her hands curled into claws, her face twisted in a mask of total denial. She was completely broken by the cognitive dissonance. Her brain could not bridge the gap between the daughter she despised and the multi-million-dollar legal powerhouse currently holding her entire life hostage. I do not believe you, she hissed, spit flying from her lips. I do not believe a single word coming out of your mouth. You stole this. You committed fraud. Terrence is going to have you arrested. Terrence is not arresting anyone. Prescott finally spoke, his voice like cracking ice. The senior managing partner stepped forward, ripping his gaze away from his soon-to-be former employee to look at me. Miss Anderson, my name is Richard Prescott. I assume you are the anonymous landlord currently auditing my firm. I am, I replied, giving him a curt professional nod. I trust you found the compliance review enlightening. We found enough to initiate immediate termination and refer the matter to the authorities. Prescott said, his face a mask of restrained fury. He turned to Terrence. You are finished. Do not even bother coming to the office to clean out your desk. We will mail you your personal effects. Terrence let out a pathetic, strangled gasp. Richard, please, I can explain. It was a temporary float. I was going to put the money back. Save it for the federal prosecutor, Sinclair spat, walking away in disgust. Brianna let out a loud theatrical sob, grabbing Terrence's arm. What are they talking about, Terrence? Tell them they are wrong. We have money. We are rich. You have nothing, I told my sister, stripping away her last remaining delusion. Your husband stole from his clients to pay for your luxury cruise and your designer clothes. And now he is going to prison, and you are going to be left with $80,000 of credit card debt and no home to live in. My parents were completely surrounded by the wreckage of their own creation. The Grand Greenwich estate felt less like a palace and more like a tomb. They had pushed all their chips to the center of the table on a losing hand, and I had just called their bluff. "Where did you get the money?" my father asked again, his voice cracking, entirely unable to grasp the mechanics of his destruction. $15 million, Riley. Where did it come from? I reached into the pocket of my black slacks and pulled out a small, flat object. It was enclosed in a protective crystal clear acrylic display case. I held it up so the overhead chandelier light caught the silver scratch off residue perfectly. "I took Mom's advice," I said, staring directly into my mother's horrified eyes. "I made an investment." The silence following my declaration was absolute and suffocating. The acrylic case caught the light of the crystal chandelier, casting a harsh glare across my mother's frozen, terrified face. Terrence stared at the $1 ticket, his brain visibly stalling as it attempted to process the sheer mathematical impossibility of what I had just said. The arrogant senior tax attorney, the man who had mocked my tax bracket over a roasted turkey, was glitching. "You won the lottery," Terrence whispered, his voice entirely devoid of its usual booming resonance. It sounded like air escaping a punctured tire. "The $200 million jackpot from Thanksgiving. $120 million after taking the lump sum and paying the federal taxes you so kindly reminded me about," I replied, slipping the acrylic case back into my pocket with a smooth, deliberate motion. "But yes, Terrence, I won the lottery. And then I went shopping." Terrence took a shaky step forward. His tailored suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big on his deflating frame. "You bought the Greenwich estate. You bought your own apartment building." He shook his head violently, his eyes darting frantically between Prescott and Sinclair. "But the audit. The ethical review at Montgomery and Pierce? You said you ordered it. You cannot just order an audit of a private law firm because you won the lottery. That makes no legal sense." I turned my full attention to him, letting the temperature in my voice drop to absolute zero. "I can order an audit when the shell company I established, Apex Holdings, acquires a controlling interest in the commercial high-rise located in the financial district. The exact high-rise where Montgomery and Pierce leases the top 3 floors. I am not just my parents' landlord, Terrence. I am your landlord, too." The color completely drained from Terrence's face, leaving an ashen, sickly gray in its wake. His jaw dropped open, but no sound emerged. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. I had not just exposed his wire fraud. I had orchestrated the entire administrative environment that forced his own superiors to discover it. I had bought the building specifically to weaponize the lease agreement against him. Prescott stepped aggressively into Terrence's personal space, his face purple with outrage. "You arrogant, reckless fool," Prescott spat, jabbing a thick finger into Terrence's chest. "We received the routine compliance request from the new property management group on Wednesday. It was standard procedure for the building transition. If you had not been treating our client trust accounts like your own personal piggy bank to fund your wife's shopping addiction, we would have passed the review without a second thought. You handed our entire firm's reputation over to a commercial landlord on a silver platter." "Harrison, please," Terrence begged, his voice cracking. The confident, swaggering attorney was completely gone. He was physically shrinking, his shoulders hunching inward as he held his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. "I can fix this. I have assets. I can liquidate the offshore accounts. I just need a week to balance the ledgers." "You have nothing to liquidate," I interrupted smoothly. "Your offshore dummy accounts are empty, Terrence. You drained them to pay for Brianna's luxury Mediterranean cruise and the massive deposit on the rented sports car sitting in my driveway right now. You are floating on fumes and stolen client retainer fees." Sinclair let out a sharp, disgusted sound. "We are notifying the State Bar Association in the morning, and we are contacting the federal prosecutor before the end of the day. You are going to prison, Terrence." Sinclair then turned to me, his posture instantly shifting from aggressive hostility to cautious, terrified deference. The head of corporate compliance was practically bowing to the woman in the plain black turtleneck. "Miss Anderson, on behalf of Montgomery and Pierce, we assure you this was the action of a single rogue employee. We are taking immediate and severe corrective measures. We beg you not to let his criminal negligence affect the renewal of our commercial lease. That depends entirely on how swiftly and ruthlessly you remove the rot from your firm, Mr. Sinclair, I replied, holding his gaze until he nervously looked away. Terrence snapped. The impending reality of prison disbarment and absolute public ruin broke him completely. He spun around, his frantic eyes searching the crowd until they locked onto Brianna. My sister was pressing herself against the grand mahogany staircase, clutching her crimson designer gown, looking like a cornered animal. "This is your fault!" Terrence roared, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. He pointed a trembling finger at Brianna, his face twisted in a mask of ugly, desperate rage. "You and your insane spending. The bags, the clubs, the cars. You told me your parents were going to secure a home equity loan to pay me back. You said they were kicking Riley out to get the cash by Friday." Brianna shook her head wildly, tears of black mascara streaking down her heavily spray-tanned cheeks. "Terrence, stop. Everyone is watching us. Do not do this here. I am going to federal prison because of you," Terrence screamed entirely, ignoring the wealthy guests who were watching the spectacle with morbid fascination. "I threw away my entire career to keep you dripping in designer garbage so you could post photos on the internet. You promised me the money was coming. You promised me they were selling Riley's apartment to cover the debt." "They tried," I interjected, keeping my tone light and conversational. "But as we have already established, they were trying to sell a building I had already purchased. It is a bit difficult to secure a line of credit against a property when you no longer hold the deed." Terrence collapsed to his knees right there on the polished hardwood floor of the grand foyer. The expensive fabric of his custom-tailored suit wrinkled around his trembling legs. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a loud, pathetic sob that echoed up into the vaulted ceiling. It was a staggering, humiliating display of total defeat. The man who had mocked my freelance income, who had told me I was financially worthless, was currently kneeling at my feet, crying over his impending incarceration. "Get up, Terrence," my father demanded, his voice weak and trembling. "Have some dignity, man." "Dignity," Terrence yelled, dropping his hands and looking up at my father with wild, bloodshot eyes. "You fraudulent broke cowards. You paraded me around your country club friends like a trophy, begging me to marry your daughter so you could maintain your fake social status. You have been refinancing this house for 15 years to pay for your own vanity. You are just as broke as we are." My mother let out a sharp, offended gasp, clutching her diamond necklace. "How dare you speak to us that way in our own home?" "It is not your home," Eleanor Terrence spat back, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "It is hers. She owns you. She owns all of us." The absolute truth of his statement hung heavily in the air. The grand illusion my parents had spent decades cultivating was entirely dead. Terrence had stripped away the final layer of polite society pretense, exposing the rotting, debt-ridden core of their existence to every single guest in the room. I stood tall amidst the wreckage of their lives, holding the black leather portfolio. I had not raised my voice once. I had not thrown a single insult. I had simply used their own weapons against them, wielding the brutal, undeniable power of absolute leverage. The shift in the room was palpable. I was no longer the invisible ghostwriter or the disappointing daughter. I was the architect of their destruction, and there was absolutely nowhere left for them to hide. I think I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the sound of Terrence's quiet sobbing, "It is time we discussed your eviction." My father stared at me, his chest heaving as the reality of my words finally penetrated his thick skull. "Eviction." He choked out the word, scraping against his throat like sandpaper. "You cannot evict us from our own home, Riley. This is insane. I do not care what those papers say. Where did you actually get the capital for this? Who is backing you?" My mother surged forward, her manicured claws flexing as she pointed a shaking finger at my face. "She found some disgusting old billionaire to fund this little revenge fantasy. That is the only explanation. You are fronting for some predatory investor trying to steal our legacy because you are too bitter to accept your own failures." I let out a sharp, cold laugh. I held up the clear acrylic case again, stepping directly into the center of the foyer so every single guest could see it clearly. The bright, gaudy colors of the cheap scratch-off ticket contrasted violently with the elegant crystal and mahogany surrounding us. "There is no secret billionaire backer, Mom," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "There is no corporate conspiracy. There is just this." My mother squinted at the small plastic case, her face contorting in confusion. "A lottery ticket. You expect us to believe you won the lottery. People like us do not play the lottery. It is a tax on the poor." "You are absolutely right," I agreed smoothly. "You do not play the lottery. But you do buy cheap $1 scratchers at the gas station when you want to publicly humiliate your eldest daughter at the Thanksgiving dinner table." The color completely drained from my mother's face. Her eyes widened, locking onto the specific colorful logo printed on the cardboard inside the case. Her mouth opened, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She recognized it. The memory of her tossing that crumpled piece of paper across the dining room table hit her with the physical force of a sledgehammer. "You told me I was wasting the food on your table," I reminded her, projecting my voice so the entire crowd of silent, captivated socialites could hear every single word. "You told me I had no ambition, no future, and that this $1 ticket was my only shot at ever being worth anything." You laughed while Terrence mocked my tax bracket, and Brianna flaunted a cruise paid for with stolen money. My father stumbled backward, bumping into a caterer's table. The crystal glasses rattled ominously. "That ticket," he whispered, his eyes wide with absolute horror. "The gag gift." "It was the winning Powerball jackpot ticket," I stated, delivering the final lethal blow to their sanity. $200 million. "I scratched it at a freezing gas station 10 minutes after you forced me to wash your dishes and plotted to sell my apartment. I held the winning numbers in my hand while you spent the next 3 weeks frantically trying to secure a fraudulent home equity loan to bail out Brianna's catastrophic credit card debt." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum. No one coughed. No one whispered. The elite guests of Greenwich were staring at my parents not just as financial frauds, but as people who had been cosmically, legendarily punished for their own arrogant cruelty. The poetic justice of the situation hung over the room like a heavy, thick fog. Brianna let out a pathetic whimpering sound. She looked at the ticket in the acrylic case, realizing that her $13,000 Mediterranean cruise was absolute pennies compared to the empire I was holding in the palm of my hand. The cruise she had bragged about, the one that pushed her further into unmanageable debt, was nothing. I could buy the entire cruise line with the cash sitting in my private banking account. "You knew," my mother gasped, her legs finally giving out. She collapsed onto the bottom step of the grand mahogany staircase, clutching the banister as if the floor were actively dropping out from under her. "You knew this whole time. While we were struggling with the bank, while we were dealing with the real estate agents, you were sitting on $200 million. I was sitting on a blind trust managed by the most aggressive corporate acquisition firm in Manhattan," I corrected her coldly. "I gave you exactly what you asked for, Mom. I became a highly motivated, ambitious investor. I just decided to invest in your absolute ruin." I turned to look at the crowd of wealthy guests who were practically holding their breath. "The Anderson family legacy you all came to celebrate tonight is officially bankrupt. The house you are standing in belongs to me. The drinks you are holding were paid for by me, and the people hosting you are currently trespassing on my private property." The wealthy guests did not need to be told twice. The string quartet had already packed their cellos and violins, slipping quietly out the side doors. Prescott and Sinclair turned on their heels, marching toward the heavy oak front doors without a single backward glance at Terrence. The rest of the Greenwich elite followed suit in a rapid, coordinated exodus. There were no polite goodbyes. There were no promises to call. The silence of their rapid departure was deafening, leaving only the 5 of us standing in the glittering wreckage of the grand foyer. The massive front doors clicked shut, sealing my family inside the tomb of their own making. My mother was the first to pivot. The sheer speed at which she discarded her lifelong disdain for me and adopted the role of a loving, misunderstood parent was enough to induce severe whiplash. She pushed herself up from the bottom stair, smoothing the wrinkles from her emerald silk dress, and took a tentative, trembling step toward me. Her eyes were wide, brimming with manufactured tears that sparkled under the crystal chandelier. "Riley, sweetheart," My mother began, her voice quivering with practiced vulnerability. We were just so hard on you because we saw your massive potential. We knew you were destined for absolute greatness. This proves it. You are a brilliant, ruthless investor. You took a harsh lesson and turned it into an empire. That is exactly the kind of ambition your father and I always wanted to instill in you. We pushed you because we loved you. We are so incredibly proud of the woman you have become tonight. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the psychological delusion required to spin a gag gift and a malicious eviction notice into a masterclass on tough love parenting. You cannot gaslight your way out of an active foreclosure, Mom, I said flatly, keeping my hands resting loosely at my sides. You tried to throw me out on the street in December to protect a lie. My father moved to stand beside her, holding his hands up in a desperate, placating gesture. His corporate bravado had entirely melted away, leaving a terrified, aging man facing total bankruptcy. Riley, please be reasonable. We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you in this beautiful home. We admit we made some severe miscalculations regarding the property management, but keeping this immense wealth within the family is what truly matters now. We can fire David Caldwell tomorrow morning and manage this portfolio together as a unified front. We have connections. We can rebuild the Anderson legacy bigger than ever. You do not need to do this alone. Before I could fully dismantle my father's pathetic attempt to insert his name onto my bank accounts, Brianna launched herself across the foyer. She practically tackled my knees, her crimson designer gown pooling on the hardwood floor as she knelt on the expensive Persian rug. The arrogant yacht chartering socialite from the text messages was completely gone. In her place was a terrified bankrupt fraud crying rivers of black mascara down her artificially tanned face. "Riley, please," Brianna sobbed, grabbing the hem of my black turtleneck with shaking fingers. "You have to help me. Terrence is going to jail, and the rental company is going to press felony charges for the car by the end of the week. I owe $80,000 on high-interest credit cards. That is absolutely nothing to you now. It is pocket change. You have $120 million in cash. You can write a check right now and make all of this go away. You are my big sister. You are supposed to protect me." I looked down at her grasping hands, feeling absolutely zero pity. "Protect you?" I asked softly, my voice echoing in the large room. "Like how you protected me when you and Mom were laughing in the pantry about forcing me into a cheap studio apartment in the industrial district. You told me to use food stamps, Brianna. You mocked my career from a yacht paid for with stolen corporate funds. You do not want a sister. You want an automated teller machine." Terrence scrambled up from the floor, his custom-tailored suit wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. He shoved Brianna aside roughly, his aggressive legal instincts kicking in as a frantic last-ditch survival mechanism. He tried to straighten his posture desperately, attempting to project the authority and control he had permanently lost just moments ago. "Listen to me, Riley," Terrence said, his voice sharp, fast, and breathless. "You have pulled off an impressive hostile takeover. I will give you that. It was a brilliant corporate maneuver. But managing a 9-figure asset portfolio requires highly sophisticated legal structuring. Caldwell is bleeding you dry with exorbitant retainer fees. You need someone on the inside. Keep the wealth in the family. That is the sacred tradition of old money. You pay off my firm to drop the criminal charges clear. Brianna's debts to stop the bleeding, and I will personally act as your exclusive in-house counsel. I can shelter your assets from federal capital gains taxes. We can build a dynasty together. It is a mutually beneficial settlement." I looked at the four of them surrounding me, my mother crying fake tears of pride and maternal devotion, my father begging for a seat at the boardroom table he had just been fired from, my sister kneeling in the ruins of her own expensive makeup begging for a bailout, my brother-in-law offering to commit aggressive tax fraud on my behalf to save himself from a federal prison sentence. They were scrambling like rats on a sinking ship, willing to say or do absolutely anything to secure a lifeline. They were throwing away every ounce of their dignity, trading their arrogant pride for a desperate chance to latch on to the very daughter they had treated like human garbage for over 3 decades. I watched them scramble like desperate cornered animals. The urge to laugh had entirely evaporated, replaced by a profound icy stillness that settled deep into my bones. I looked at Terrence first. "You want to be my in-house counsel, Terrence?" I asked, my voice slicing through his frantic babbling. "You want me to pay off a massive white-collar crime so you can funnel my assets into your fraudulent accounts? You are absolutely radioactive. The federal prosecutors are already drafting your indictment for commingling client funds. Apex Holdings does not hire felons, and we certainly do not do business with arrogant men who mock people working honest jobs. Your career is over." I turned my gaze to my sister, who was still kneeling on the Persian rug in her ruined designer gown. "And you, Brianna? $80,000 is literal pocket change to me now. You are exactly right about that. But I am not an automated teller machine, and I am certainly not your protector. You built your entire fake legacy on rented luxury cars and maxed out plastic. You chose to live a lie. It is time you actually work for something. Maybe they are hiring at the industrial park you so graciously recommended to me last week." Finally, I looked at the two people who brought me into this world. Managing my portfolio, I asked my father, letting a harsh, humorless smile cross my face. "You could not even manage a basic fixed-rate mortgage. You leveraged this beautiful house 3 separate times, just to buy country club memberships, fund Mediterranean cruises, and keep up appearances. You are financially illiterate, Dad. You gambled your only real asset on a golden child who squandered it on spray tans and handbags." I reached into the pocket of my black slacks and pulled out my phone. I pressed a single pre-programmed button on the screen. Less than 10 seconds later, the heavy oak front doors swung open. 6 men dressed in immaculate, tailored black suits stepped into the grand foyer. These were not local neighborhood security guards. They were the elite private tactical detail Caldwell had contracted specifically for Apex Holdings, composed entirely of highly trained former federal agents. Their faces were carved from stone, completely devoid of any emotion as they fanned out across the entryway. My mother screamed, clutching my father's arm, her diamond jewelry rattling against her collarbone. "Who are these people?" she shrieked. "Get them out of my house immediately. Howard, call the police." "This is my house," I corrected her gently, folding my arms across my chest. "And they are here to escort you off the corporate premises. It is Christmas Eve, and I prefer to spend my holidays in absolute peace and quiet." Before the security detail could lay their hands on my family, I reached into the sleek black leather portfolio one last time. I pulled out a thick, crisp white envelope and dropped it onto the silver tray I was still balancing in my left hand. I held the tray out toward my father. "Take it," I commanded for the second time that night. He reached out his hands, shaking so violently he nearly knocked over a crystal champagne flute, and grabbed the envelope. He tore open the flap. Inside sat a certified cashier's check printed on heavy watermarked bank paper. My mother leaned over his shoulder, her tear-streaked face suddenly lighting up with a desperate, pathetic flare of hope. "Is this to pay off the bank?" she gasped, her voice trembling with sudden relief. "Did you clear the debt, Riley? Are you letting us keep the house?" "Look at the amount, Mom," I instructed coldly. My father squinted at the printed numbers, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. $13,000, he read aloud, his voice dropping to a confused whisper. "Riley, the mortgage arrears alone are significantly more than this. This will not even cover a fraction of Brianna's car rental settlement. What is this supposed to do?" "I know exactly what it covers," I said, projecting my voice, so the absolute finality of my words struck them like physical blows. $13,000 is the exact cost of a 10-day luxury Mediterranean cruise. It is the exact monetary value you placed on Brianna's comfort while you handed me a $1 scratch-off ticket and laughed in my face. You told me that ticket was my only shot at a future. Well, you were completely right. It bought me a future entirely free of you. Consider that $13,000 your official severance package from my life. I continued stepping back as the lead security agent moved in to flank them. Use it for a cheap motel. Use it to hire a bankruptcy lawyer for yourselves and a criminal defense attorney for Terrence. Use it to buy a handful of cheap scratch-off tickets at a gas station and pray for a miracle. I honestly do not care. But this transaction is final. We have zero legal, financial, or familial ties from this exact second forward. You are officially strangers trespassing on my private property. You cannot do this to us on Christmas Eve, my mother wailed, dropping to her knees again, the heavy emerald silk of her dress pooling around her. We have nowhere to go. All our things are upstairs. Our clothes, our jewelry, my entire life is in this house. You cannot throw your own mother out into the snow. Your personal belongings will be boxed up by a professional moving company tomorrow morning and shipped to whatever address you provide my legal team. I replied, my voice completely devoid of human empathy. If you do not provide a forwarding address within 48 hours, every single designer item in this house gets donated to a charity thrift store. Now leave. The security team did not wait for another invitation. They moved with silent, aggressive efficiency. 2 agents hauled Terrence to his feet by the armpits, completely ignoring his frantic, legally incoherent babbling about suing me for emotional distress. Another agent grabbed Brianna by the elbow, pulling her up from the Persian rug while she shrieked and flailed her arms, desperate to hold on to the illusion of her wealthy lifestyle. My father tried to puff out his chest, attempting to muster one last shred of patriarchal authority, but a security guard twice his size simply pointed a rigid finger toward the open doors. The patriarch crumbled instantly. He grabbed my mother by the arm, hauling her to her feet, and dragged her toward the exit, clutching the $13,000 check like a lifeline. The freezing Connecticut wind whipped into the grand foyer as the security team marched them out onto the snowy front steps. The contrast was breathtaking. Inside, the massive Douglas fir sparkled with thousands of warm lights, the air smelling of cinnamon and expensive catering. Outside, the harsh, brutal winter storm was waiting to swallow them whole. Brianna dug her designer heels into the icy pavement, screaming my name over the howling wind. "Riley, please. I am your sister. You cannot leave me out here in the freezing cold. We do not even have a car." I walked to the threshold, standing perfectly warm inside the grand doorway. "You left me at a freezing gas station," I reminded her, keeping my voice low and lethal. "I suggest you start walking. The front gate is half a mile down the driveway, and my security team has strict orders to have you arrested for trespassing if you linger on the property for more than 5 minutes." My mother turned back one last time. Her expensive makeup was running down her face in thick, dark rivers. She opened her mouth to scream another curse, another desperate plea, another toxic manipulation. But I did not give her the chance. I reached out, grabbed the heavy brass handle of the grand oak door, and slammed it shut right in her face. The heavy thud echoed through the empty mansion, severing the connection forever. I turned around, listening to the absolute pristine silence of my newly acquired estate. The catered food sat untouched. The champagne sparkled in the light. The toxic noise of my family was finally permanently gone. The next 6 months played out like a masterfully orchestrated symphony of karmic justice. I watched all of it unfold from a comfortable, insulated distance, receiving regular, highly sanitized updates from Caldwell's team regarding the legal and financial fallout. I did not gloat publicly. I did not send them mocking text messages or post photos of my new lifestyle online to taunt them. True power does not require an audience. It simply requires execution. They had spent 33 years building their identities on the premise that they were inherently superior to me. The universe, guided by a $1 scratch-off ticket and a team of Manhattan lawyers, had violently corrected that imbalance. The destruction of Terrence's career was swift, absolute, and entirely merciless. The senior partners at his law firm, Prescott and Sinclair, acted with the ruthless efficiency of men protecting a billion-dollar brand. They did not just fire Terrence. They handed his entire financial history over to the state ethics board, wrapped in a neat, legally binding bow. The investigation was utterly brutal. Every dummy account, every diverted client retainer, every frantic midnight wire transfer was laid bare before the review committee. By February, Terrence was officially disbarred, stripped of the prestigious legal license he had used to terrorize everyone around him. But the professional exile was only the appetizer. The federal prosecutors stepped in shortly after handing down a multi-count indictment for wire fraud and embezzlement. His bank accounts were immediately frozen by the feds. The custom-tailored suits were replaced by court-mandated appearances. The local business journals picked up the story of the disgraced tax attorney, splashing his sweaty, terrified face across the front page of the financial section as he left the federal courthouse in handcuffs. The arrogant shark who had sneered at my tax bracket was now facing a mandatory minimum of 8 years in federal prison, and he could not even afford to hire private defense counsel. He was forced to rely on an overworked public defender. He had spent his entire adult life desperately trying to claw his way into the upper echelons of old money society. And now he was a cautionary tale, a disgraced laughingstock whose name was synonymous with petty, desperate fraud. As for my sister, the illusion of her Mediterranean yacht lifestyle evaporated the second the federal asset freeze hit her husband. Brianna did exactly what a parasite does when the host dies. She tried to detach and flee. She filed for divorce in early March, citing irreconcilable differences and desperately attempting to petition for spousal support. The family court judge practically laughed her out of the room. You cannot split marital assets when the only thing tying the marriage together is a staggering mountain of consumer debt and criminal restitution claims. Without Terrence's stolen retainer fees floating her minimum payments, Brianna's creditors descended like a pack of starving wolves. Her downfall was heavily documented on the very social media platforms she used to worship. The day the repo men finally tracked down the luxury European car, she was sitting in a local cafe pretending to have a business meeting. Witnesses filmed the entire altercation as the tow truck driver hooked up the vehicle while Brianna shrieked and pounded her fists against the hood, demanding they stop. The video went viral locally. Her carefully curated influencer aesthetic was instantly shattered. The wealthy socialites she had desperately courted immediately blocked her numbers. With no husband to leech off of and no parents to bail her out, she was forced to declare. Chapter 7: Bankruptcy. I actually allowed myself a quiet smile when I drove past a strip mall on the outskirts of the city one Tuesday afternoon. I spotted Brianna wearing a neon green polyester uniform, handing out free samples outside a discount vitamin store. The pampered princess was finally learning the crushing reality of minimum wage labor. My parents suffered the most agonizing fate of all because they actually had to live with the conscious knowledge of what they threw away. The $13,000 severance check I had handed them on Christmas Eve evaporated faster than snow on hot pavement. They burned through a massive chunk of it, living in overpriced extended stay hotels, stubbornly clinging to the delusion that they could somehow fight my acquisition of their estate in court. But no lawyer would take their case without a massive retainer they no longer had, especially after seeing the airtight legal structuring Caldwell's team had executed. When the hotel funds ran dry, reality finally breached their defenses. Their elite social circle dropped them with terrifying speed. In Greenwich, financial failure is considered a highly contagious disease. The friends they had entertained at Thanksgiving, the people they had lied to about my phantom overseas career, completely erased them from their contact lists. Their country club membership was revoked for non-payment of dues. They were forced to sign a lease on a cramped, dilapidated two-bedroom apartment in a heavily industrialized suburb 40 miles outside of the city. The irony was absolutely exquisite. They were now living in the exact undesirable neighborhood my mother had threatened to banish me to. I received a brief report from a private investigator I had retained just to keep tabs on their location for security purposes. The report included a photograph of the rundown apartment complex they now called home. The building had barred windows, overflowing dumpsters in the parking lot, and a distinct lack of any landscaping. My mother, the woman who had scoffed at my organic turkey because it lacked a corporate catering logo, was now clipping grocery store coupons just to afford basic necessities. My father was working part-time as a greeter at a big-box hardware store, standing on his feet for 8 hours a day, just to keep the lights on in their drafty unit. They were entirely cut off from my world. I had changed my phone number, established an ironclad no-contact order through Caldwell's legal department, and hired a private security firm to ensure none of them ever stepped foot within a 5-mile radius of my properties. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Pity is reserved for victims of circumstance. My family were victims of their own toxic, unmitigated greed. I sat back against the buttery, soft, cream-colored leather of my seat, pulling my attention away from the past and back to my current beautiful reality. The low, steady hum of the twin engines was the only sound inside the spacious cabin of the Gulfstream jet. I was cruising at 45,000 feet, suspended high above the clouds, completely detached from the wreckage I had left behind on the East Coast. Through the large oval window beside me, the first pale streaks of dawn were beginning to paint the horizon in brilliant shades of violet and gold over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. I was on my way to Kyoto. I had never taken a real vacation in my adult life. Every spare dollar I had ever earned had gone toward keeping a roof over my head and maintaining the fragile peace with my parents. Now I was flying across the world to spend a month in a private traditional ryokan, surrounded by quiet bamboo forests and ancient stone gardens. There would be no catering to anyone else's ego, no washing dishes to earn my keep, and absolutely no cheap scratch-off tickets. A flight attendant, a discreet woman in a pristine navy uniform, approached silently and placed a steaming porcelain cup of green tea on the polished walnut table in front of me. She offered a warm, respectful smile and retreated to the front galley, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, letting the soothing heat seep into my skin. It was a stark, wonderful contrast to the freezing winter night when I had walked out of my parents' mansion with nothing but the clothes on my back and a $1 piece of cardboard in my pocket. I reached into my travel bag and pulled out my old cell phone. It was the same battered device I had owned for 3 years, its screen cracked in the bottom corner. I had already purchased a new secure phone tied to an untraceable corporate account, but I had kept this old device active for one very specific reason. I wanted to witness the final dying gasps of their desperation before I completely severed the cord. I tapped the cracked screen to wake it up. The display immediately illuminated, flooded with a chaotic, desperate wall of notifications. There were frantic text messages from unknown numbers, voicemails pleading for a second chance, and a staggering string of missed call alerts. I swiped down to view the call log. 89 missed calls. All of them were from my mother. 89 separate attempts to reach out across the void she had created. I could easily imagine her sitting in her cramped, drafty apartment in that industrial suburb, staring at the peeling wallpaper, frantically redialing my number, as the reality of her new life crushed the breath out of her. I could picture the exact mix of panic, entitlement, and delayed regret contorting her face with every ring that went unanswered. A few months ago, ignoring even a single call from her would have triggered a massive anxiety attack in my chest. I would have scrambled to return it, terrified of her ensuing wrath and verbal abuse. Now, staring at the number 89 glowing on the digital display, I felt absolutely nothing. The well of my empathy had run completely dry. There was no anger left to burn, no sorrow left to process, and no lingering desire for revenge. They were just strangers screaming into a dead receiver. I did not listen to the voicemails. I did not read the frantic, manipulative text messages begging for a final chance. I simply pressed my thumb against the power button on the side of the device. I held it down with a firm, steady pressure. A prompt appeared on the screen, asking me to confirm my decision to power off the device. I swiped my finger across the glass, executing the command. The screen flickered for a brief second before fading into total, absolute blackness. I picked up the dead, useless piece of technology and dropped it casually into the small waste bin concealed beneath the walnut table. When I landed in Japan, that phone would be incinerated. The ghostwriter Riley Anderson, the family disappointment, the invisible daughter ceased to exist the exact moment that screen went dark. I turned my gaze back to the window. The sun finally broke over the curvature of the earth, flooding the cabin of the private jet with brilliant, blinding light. The sky ahead was vast, clear, and totally unwritten. I took a slow, deep sip of my hot tea, settling deep into the luxurious leather seat. For the first time in my 33 years on this planet, I was in absolute, unquestionable control of my own altitude. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the morning sun wash over my face, and finally truly exhaled. Riley's journey from a discarded ghostwriter to an empowered centimillionaire offers a profound masterclass in recognizing one's own value. The most striking lesson we can extract from her story is not about the sudden influx of staggering wealth, but rather the realization that your self-worth should never be held hostage by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. For decades, Riley's parents and sister weaponized their conditional love using financial status to diminish her existence and elevate a fragile, fraudulent facade. They convinced her she was a burden simply because she refused to play their rigged game. However, the true turning point in Riley's life did not occur when she scratched that winning ticket at a freezing gas station. It happened the moment she stopped seeking validation from an empty well. Wealth was merely the tool she used to expose their toxic illusions, but her ultimate liberation came from establishing an absolute, impenetrable boundary. She realized that trying to prove her worth to people who actively benefited from her subjugation was a losing battle. By quietly securing her assets and letting her family's own arrogance orchestrate their downfall, she demonstrated that the most effective response to chronic manipulation is radical detachment. You do not owe your loyalty to a bloodline that treats you as collateral damage. Healing begins when you stop accepting scraps of affection and start demanding the respect you inherently deserve. Riley's story reminds us that we are the sole architects of our own destinies. When an environment threatens to crush your spirit, the bravest thing you can do is sever the ties and fly toward your own dawn. Evaluate the relationships in your own life today and boldly cut ties with anyone who forces you to shrink to fit their insecurities.